Yo, welcome back to another video. Now this is going to be a short video going over Rimuru and the blacksmith, because this is something that I didn't show in my previous video, but I showed Ragnar working with blacksmith, so I thought I'll do the same thing with Rimuru because that is another unit that is very similar in a way to Ragnar. Let's go straight into looking at the reason why you would want to use Smith with Rimuru is because of his third passive. Any buff applied to this unit is shared among the placements, which is a very good thing to have. It is only like single target buffs, not AoE buffs, because an AoE buff would share among all of them anyway. So yeah. Now the reason why I didn't do it initially is because I didn't really test it fully to begin with, and I thought it wasn't working. Like, I thought it didn't really work. It does work, but there are also things that don't work. So first thing that I'll go over is the things that don't work, just to clear up any misunderstandings with how the smith interacts with Rimuru first. So the first thing is the forge weapons themselves. If I go ahead and use a silver sword on my first Rimuru, all of them get buffed. But then let's say I go ahead and do the spear on the next Rimuru. What happens here is all of the rest of the Rimurus still have that sword buff, but they don't get the spear buff. But the one that got the spear loses the sword buff and only gets the spear buff. That is the first thing to understand, is that the first forged weapon that gets placed on them, that's the one that would buff all of them, and then the next ones after that only buff that singular individual unit, which I will showcase just once again real quick. There you go, they all got buffed. And I put the spear onto Rimuru, and as you can see, he loses that sword buff and gets the spear buff. I'll do it again with the dagger on another Rimuru. He loses the sword buff and gets the dagger buff, and then I'll do it once again with another dagger on the last Rimuru. Loses the sword, gets the dagger buff, and then that original one still has the sword buff. So that's the first thing to keep in mind when using Rimuru with the smith. The next thing that we're going to be going over is one thing that I think is actually a bug right now. So we have the Dragon Slayer and we have Salamander Dagger. Now this is kind of bugged. I think it's a back-end coding thing where it's recognizing one of these two stats incorrectly depending on which one you place on Rimuru's first. So as an example right now, I'll use Dragon Slayer on a Rimuru. They'll all get buffed by 40% damage, but then we go ahead and go to Salamander Dagger and then put that on the next Rimuru. Instead of gaining 20% range, he is losing 20% damage. I think it's because it's thinking that the Salamander Dagger is buffing by 20 damage instead of 20 range instead. That's why he is losing 20% damage, which is a very odd thing. I'll show the exact same thing, but let's say instead of doing Dragon Slayer first, we do the Salamander Dagger first. I put the Salamander Dagger on all 4 of the Rimurus right there, just like so. They have all 20% range buff, but then I go ahead and add the Dragon Slayer to a different Rimuru and he gets a plus 20 range. So yeah, they work vice versa, where if you use the Dragon Slayer first, it thinks that this is also increases damage and not increases range, and then the vice versa, if you use Salamander Dagger first, it thinks that this is increased range instead of increased damage. Yeah, that is just showing that this is something that can't work currently. I'm assuming it's a bug. And the last thing to show before we actually go into looking at how he buffs with the Dragon's Great Shield and the Berserker Armor, this buff that these give is immune to status effects and immune to debuffs. This will only apply to the single Rimuru that actually gets it added to. I'm not going to showcase it. If you want to figure it out or look at it yourself, you can, but just keep with my word that it does actually only work like that, where let's say I put the Great Shield onto my first Rimuru right here, all other 3 Rimurus would still be able to get stunned, while that one Rimuru that has the Great Shield cannot get stunned. Alright, so now moving on to how we would go ahead and fully maximize the buff with Smith onto Rimuru. First, you either want to use Sword of Actuation or Dragon Slayer on your units first. So I go ahead and use a Dragon Slayer. They all have the 40% buff. Now we go ahead and move on to the other Masterwork weapon that we have not used. This is Sword of Actuation that we're going to use. There you go. Now they are all being buffed by 20% and reduce SPA by 10%. And then lastly, this is what you want to do last, because I'll showcase why, but you always want to do a forge weapon last. So I'll do it on another Rimuru, and as you can see right here, this should be the highest damage buff that you can get from using a smith with Rimuru, which is honestly pretty good. 3.05 times damage with just the smith alone and 4 Rimurus placed is really good. But this is what I mean when you want to have the forge be the last one that you want to use, because let's say I now want to put status effect ailment on one of them, he will lose the forge buff. So that is how it works for some reason. So you kind of just want to have the forge buff be the last one that you want to put on the units. But yeah, that is pretty much this video, just showcasing how Rimuru works with the smith and how you want to use him to get his maximum damage. But yeah, that will be this video. It was a short one, but it is good to know these things. So yeah, I appreciate it if you haven't watched this far through the video. See ya.